And so along the lines of like complex and really sophisticated attacks, research is one thing, something that's actually in the wild. You did a blog on the Inception Framework. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this was, it was fun. It was a cooperative investigation with one of the researchers from our Norman Shark team in Norway and one of the guys on the WebPulse team. And on the WebPulse side, we look more at traffic on the attack, and then the Norman guys are more about hardcore binary reversing. And so they worked as a team to take this apart. And it started basically with an interesting malware sample that showed up, and they had an email with it. And so it was a spear phishing-based attack, RTF document using a new Windows vulnerability, or a Microsoft vulnerability, a CVE 2014, and a vulnerability from 2012. So both in the same document, and so the.
Now, was that do you think that was to try to get all the
cover the bases? You know, you increase the if you can do that, if you can bundle multiple, it's the same with an exploit kit on a website. If you can rather than just have one attack and that better work or it doesn't work, if you can have 6 or 7 or 8 different exploits that you target, you increase the yield of your attack.
Get the ones that are up to date in patchers, and also get the ones that just don't.
Plus, if you've got a 0-day exploit and you're a bad guy, you don't necessarily want to burn that unless you have to. It's nice if you can infect with a simple exploit. Then you keep more of your cards close to your vest.
Okay.
The thing I found interesting about this particular attack as a guy who's been doing engineering management for a number of years is the complexity, the depth and breadth of knowledge that the attackers had to possess in order to actually, what I think of, architect, design, organize. They probably had requirements documents. I don't know if they have a product manager, but they went to a great deal of trouble to not only ensure that it was very stable, so that it wouldn't be detectable. It was hosting itself on servers that were out there publicly available to other people, and they went to a lot of trouble to evade any kind of detection or trace back to whoever the authors were of this particular APT. So to me, I thought, okay, that's an organization that's going to cost money, you're paying salaries, people are coming to work, they're whiteboarding designs, very, very involved. And the thing that was doubly interesting is that they built it in such a way that it's pluggable, they could upgrade their software, and it looked to be flexible enough that they could migrate it to different platforms. And in the pervasiveness, they covered all their bases in terms of Windows and obviously BlackBerry, iOS, Android. Lastly, the kind of information they were looking for wasn't your credit cards or social security numbers. It was more along the lines of being able to listen to phone calls, being able to gather contact information, those sorts of things.
Wow. So, I mean, I guess one of the things that I don't want to detract from the points you're making here, but in fact I want to hopefully reinforce it. I think one of the things that tends to get overlooked is that it's not just the malware, it's all of the coordination around a sophisticated attack, the distribution activities, even in some cases, let's take the Sony Pictures case as an example, just the coordination of what becomes public, when it becomes public, how you present that is something that has to be thought through. It's a different kind of person than is sitting down at the keyboard actually creating. Yeah, it's a marketing person.
Malware.
Right? And so I think that's one of the sort of indicators that we really need to be paying a little more attention to. I haven't seen a lot of discussion about in terms of making a distinction between what is really an advanced attack versus just a hacker activity. So
the reason they named it Inception is when they found the samples were beaconing home to a Swedish cloud host, CloudMe. And so, okay, that's for layer one, right? So we actually contacted CloudMe and said, hey, you have some accounts that are bogus accounts on your service, and they're being used as command and control. There are these infected machines connecting and then downloading payload updates. And so CloudMe worked with us, and we said, where is that traffic coming from? So they shared some of the snippets of the logs with us. And the next layer was routers from home and small business things. So, and mostly in South Korea, interestingly enough. And so there were these hacked routers that the bad guys were connecting to the router and then using that to send encrypted traffic to the CloudMe account. And so then getting our hands on some of the router traffic, say, well, where's that coming from? Well, that's coming from servers from various internet providers that have just rented servers. Well, where's that traffic? Well, you don't know. Now, you run out of layers that you can work through, and the bad guys were somewhere behind that.
Wow.
Who knows how many more layers, right? And so I said,
Right.
well, this is like that Inception movie where it's just like you're a dream within a dream within a dream. They've gone to such great pains to separate those layers to just avoid any possibility of identifying who they are.
Yeah, interesting. Routers were a part of that because I don't know too many routers that do a very good job at logging the events that are going through it. So
what we
unless you do
suspected
something
was
deliberate.
default password. So if you haven't heard that before, set your password to something other than the default.
Yeah, absolutely. We've never encountered any case where default password was used.
Nobody does that.
I mean, this is obviously the concern here is that a lot of devices get put on the net. In fact, sometimes they don't even tell you they have those passwords available. You have to actually go digging for it. And so, for most people, they buy a device, they stick it on a network, and they expect it to be secure. And
people want it to just work, number one. They want it to be able to plug and play.
Yeah, right. So, very good story. Thank you.
I wanted to say, actually, before we go on, it was interesting. I read the article, and the links they went to disguise their origin as well, not just their physical origin, but the country of origin. There's so many different little red herrings that they inserted into it.
Yes.
And they could have, one red herring is probably fine. Two is, more of a case against it. Like 7 or 8 or 9 in there. It sounds like they're just poking fun at us at that point.
They were covering all their bases, very, very thorough.
That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and again, it wasn't just the basic stuff. So you can set the time stamp on a piece of software that you've built.
Right.
You can even go in and set the timestamp on individual modules that get compiled. These guys had gone to the lengths of, they were using a random number generator and they were using a date timestamp to set the initial seed for the random number generator.
No kidding.
And so our guys thought, aha, now we know when it was really compiled, because one of the tricks is you try to match that to a working 9 to 5 sort of working day, where in the world was this built?
Right.
And they found out that the bad guys had actually cheated there. In case someone looked, they had generated date timestamps for the random number generator, but they'd used future dates.
No kidding.
Just as a way to thumb your nose and say, if you guys think to check this, we already thought of that.
Which, back to the organizational element, indicates that they have the minds of researchers that are part of their design process. They have to be thinking like the guys who were going to discover them.
And they expected researchers to find bits and pieces of this and to start poking around. And so they were aware of that. They were watching for the researchers to connect to the CloudMe accounts, and they started putting bogus things there to be downloaded if they thought you were a researcher. So suddenly this Chinese backdoor shows up, and our guys got really excited. Look at this, they stuck some Chinese malware in there, and for the first hour or so they're like, oh man, maybe it is the Chinese. And then they did some more poking around. No, it can't be. This is a red herring that they knew we were researchers, and they dropped that for us.
Probably a little out of scope for discussion here, but it'd be interesting to debate why somebody would be so bent on creating effectively no attribution as opposed to perhaps misdirecting and suggesting a false attribution, for example.
Well, some of the early documents give us clues to that, because we were talking about embassies, militaries, governments, political sites, and those sorts of things. So maybe there's some government espionage taking place as a result of this.
Oh yeah, a good possibility. I guess the question is, is the biggest indicator who is targeted and who isn't.
That's exactly right.
See, that's why we disagree. James thinks it was a nation state. I think it was cyber criminals. And in my mind, a nation state would have done more false attribution to try and finger somebody else as the nation state doing it. but the one Chinese, that wasn't it. For these guys, that wasn't enough. That was them just making fun of the researchers. The idea of changing the date timestamp for the random number seeds to a future value, that's devious. The Chinese thing was just obvious. That wasn't devious enough.
Matt, you would have done that, wouldn't you?
No.